So thank you for all the presenters. Obviously, I want to keep very thematic to the conference today. I'm just going to move the chair open, but I have two logistical announcements. So first, this is the last you're going to get to see me, so you can all clap. Number two, and the reason for that is Sanford's informed me that they have no more chairs to add to the stage because it seems my number of chairs exponentially grow for every one of my sessions that I'm moderating. So, and the second thing is we're going to assign 2 gold stars to Kim from AbbVie and 1 from Mike from NervGen for being able to incorporate the patient feedback into their presentation. So well done. So. So like I said, I mean, there's plenty. I mean, I can ask you so much about your programs, but again, I wanted to say stay thematic with regard to the themes discussed today and yesterday. So I guess right now is, I'm going to talk to something that you can all address at this point. Combinations. All right, we have so many different approaches. We got cells at the other end, antibodies, small molecules. You know, where do you think the different modalities can go? We've heard from the physicians, et cetera. You know, you guys are developing your own assets individually. I'd love to go down the line somehow and find out, you know, where do you think the possible combinations can start and be promising?
I'll start, I guess, down the line, because I actually think that what Jim said earlier today about biologics and stimulation makes the most sense. I'm going to be completely honest, and from a pharma company perspective, I think in pharma we want to see what happens with our own agent before we start doing combo, but I think if we see a signal, it would be something we'd potentially be open to partnering. I would hope, and we certainly talk about that. But I think if what we try to do in the acute space is get someone from a state of maybe complete or near complete, and if we can get in at the time where we can salvage some of that tissue and get them to a space where they have some improvement and then would actually qualify for STIM, then I think that would be a successful combinatorial approach. I think there are many others, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Great. Another for, okay, so I get maybe as part of that. So Brian, you know, with OPC1, I mean, we're at the Sanford Center for Regenerative Medicine. So, you know, with OPC1 being a cellular approach, and you know, we've discussed it, you've discussed it, you know, everyone's very familiar with it. You know, where we're getting out of the decades of regen med being a scientific experiment. We've seen clinical data now. Where do you think cells could potentially combine well with? Because they're just, it's a completely different modality.
Yeah, I think cells do something, but if you can stimulate those cells, electrical stim, physical therapy, I think you have a better opportunity of driving a wedge between your signal and noise. And we know we have a problem with signal, right? There's probably no therapy here that's going to be like blasting through the challenges of variability in this setting. So we all have a lot of work to do on biomarkers, patient selection, intelligent clinical trial design. Like that's all going to help reduce variability. And if you can, through smart combination or smart design, increase the chances that you'll be able to detect a signal in the setting of a trial that you can run in a reasonable amount of time and you can fund and you can enroll, then yeah, you should do those things. I have 3 conversations over the last 2 days for potential collaborative efforts, which is great. But Kim's point is absolutely on target. You know, if you do a study and you say agent A does this, agent B does that, and agent A plus B together do this other thing, FDA is going to say, great, I look forward to your 4-armed clinical trial. Don't forget control. So, you know, we can barely get 1 trial done. You want to do, you know, that complex mixture is very, very difficult.
Don't say who you're having the conversations with, and put out an 8K tomorrow. So, I really want to hear from everyone on this, but I guess the current statement is, you know, with the MSci study, as well as Mike mentioned in NervGen, you know, you're looking at a lot of different endpoints. In fact, Mike, I believe you're the one that said you're putting your patients through a lot and assessing a lot. And it looks like you're going to get meaningful answers. So I guess I want to tie that to the earlier discussions and what we're looking at this meeting. And that is, how do you feel the assessment of endpoints is going to progress from the corporate standpoint? So more of the broader question. Yeah, please, I'd love to go down the
I
line.
know, and I should just level set that I, as the VP of Communications, I come from a journalism background. I am not a scientist, but what I can tell you, and also I wanted to address the previous question about partnerships
Absolutely.
because we are really excited that one of our therapies, the ARC-BCI system, does partner with CEA Clinitech, but uses this amazing power of BCI technology to see how it can be applied to this community in order to restore movement and function. So I'm really excited to hear about Neuralink's, your presentation and just the promise of BCI and just the exciting potential of specifically its application to both upper limb mobility and function and also for lower limb, as you saw exemplified in the video with Hertian. So just to speak to that. And then your question again about the endpoints.
The evolution of endpoints, because right now it's very, well, no pun intended, very clinical versus, the incorporation of, patient endpoints and just the overall evolution.
So again, not as a scientist, but I've spoken to, in the more than a year that I've been at ONWARD Medical, this has been an incredible education for me in this community because I did not cover this space or even medtech as a journalist. But in speaking to so many of our trial participants, it is incredible that you see the numbers, and our numbers are great. You heard from Dr. Tiller about our Uplift pivotal trial results. But when I speak to an ARC-EX therapy trial participant, Jessie Owen, about just the power that in her daily activities, she's able to, I click the dog collar, I'm able to brush my hair, I'm able to hold my children, and just what that means on a day-to-day basis for her to do day-to-day activities. And she speaks about how that gave her the confidence to live independently and eventually date, and now she's married with twins. I mean, it's so powerful, and how did the numbers really capture that? Or Sharon Campbell, another trial participant for our Uplift study out at Craig Hospital, and who worked with Dr. Tiller, and speaking about how much his career meant to him, and he's a software developer, and how he gets really nerdy about the typing speed. And so he actually has a program in which he could measure his typing speed and how that went up and up and up as he progressed through our trial. So as far as I think our endpoints for us were very exciting, but when you hear about these very human things, or when he spoke about how his daughter wanted a party with escape room filled with balloons, and how he was able to tie these balloons, hundreds of them, in anticipation of our party, something he wouldn't have been able to do before the stimulation. All of those are really powerful to hear, and it's exciting from my perspective to be able to share some of those vignettes with the public and sharing our story.
I'm not trying to go for my third gold star, but I think what we can do in clinical trials is really try to think very carefully about how we can lessen the burden on study participants by doing things at home. I mean, that really, resonated with me. I know people in our clinical trial getting to trial sites was challenging, and we provide transport and everything, but when you think about it from a day-to-day standpoint, that's really tough. I do think we have to be cautious with PFDD, with the FDA, that we're not going to try to solve all of the problems for every individual, and I really like the idea of looking at the individual, their baseline characteristics, and how we can look at small improvements, right? We need to start somewhere. I believe with what Brian said is something small is meaningful, and have that discussion with FDA, and have the PFDD participants talk about endpoints that we currently have. Don't create something brand new, because then you have to validate it for 10 or 20 years. But something that will correlate to something that is meaningful with what we have, the best that we have, or maybe something that's near ready in the validation stage.
And just on that point, before we move on to get the additional answers, it's like you said, take 10 to 20 years or what have you, but even we were talking about getting advisory committees in place and patient-driven advisory committees, to be able to push that process faster, to say, this smaller endpoint is very important to patients. Do you envision that happening, other than sort of, like you said, the standard timelines?
Yeah, I mean, if you had something smaller and you had more sensitive endpoints based on, I really like the idea of using historical data or synthetic controls like Kiichi has talked about, and being able to even get rid of a placebo arm. I mean, if you see something in a clinical trial that has some type of signal, it would be really nice to super reduce your placebo arm and then supplement as well. I think that could move the field faster, but I think it really takes kind of this group and the approach to kind of push it from a community level versus one sponsor. It seems very self-centered if you come from one sponsor. So I think we as a group can really push things forward and make a lot more progress than individually.
Yes, so we did 2 clinical studies in Japan, and we feel that AIS grading or INSCI motor score is not perfect, probably. So we have to come up to some novel endpoint which could utilize the further clinical development. And also, I came from Japan to attend this symposium, and this is very worth to attend. I learned a lot about patient-related drug development stuff, and since we now start clinical development in the United States, we seriously consider about including all those information in our clinical program.
Just from your standpoint, how is the PMDA reacting to novel endpoints at this point?
PMDA is very conservative, but one thing they are good about to agree that we will conduct a non-randomized single-arm phase 3 study. But in terms of patient-related outcome, I think Japan is far behind, I think.
Mike?
I think the answer is simple. We just got to get Jared to convince the FDA that anything should be an endpoint. Really, this division has shown a lot of flexibility with a lot of different, disease states, and I think, I think that trend will continue, but it's, I don't want to be the naysayer of PFDD, but I think if PFDD presets an endpoint, it's just adding another endpoint for us to hit. It's almost, it has to be an iterative process to me. I think like our clinical trial, the AbbVie clinical trial, we're going to learn stuff. And I don't think we're going to learn anything that is, we'll learn that if we have something, right? But what we're not going to learn, maybe not going to learn, is if we're going to have something that we can actually prove in another multi-center large clinical trial. So it's going to be some type of biomarker, whether it's electrophysiology or something else, to show that you're actually making connections. And then it could be a plethora of clinical potential outcomes, which is something. And I think if any company goes to the FDA in this division and shows that they have consistent biomarker data with mixed clinical results across a large group of patients, I think that's going to be enough. I really do. And I think if people with lived experience get behind that and push that, I think that'll make some changes at the FDA, and I think people will start to listen to CNS disorders. This is just a challenge. It's not as simple as like a proton pump inhibitor reducing gastric reflux. It's just not. It's just all over the board. But if you have small, meaningful achievements that reach a large group of people, they can't ignore that.
Those are all very good comments.
I agree.
I concur. And actually, look, I mean, especially as clinical stage companies and 2 public stage, well, 3 actually, you're beholden to many things here. Typical clinical trial design, investors, the FDA, you name it, but especially investors and, well, everyone equally right now. We'll just say that. But Kim, you just said a second ago too about finding more ways to work together, and that goes to my earlier question this morning about, again, how impressed I was and others were about, what Praxis is doing. And I had a couple conversations and saying, well, how does that really exist in the US? So everyone at this table right now, the physicians in the audience, can come together and discuss these common themes, like what Mike just said, like not just adding another endpoint and making it more complex, but maybe finding a way to make it easier. So I don't know if we want to have the general commentary around that, is how do we become more like a praxis, or how can companies utilize like a praxis type of model more to be able to design better, get access to the KOLs, get access to the patients, get access to the information they need.
There may be some diminishing returns too, right? There's the knowables and the unknowables. That sounds like, I think it was Karl Rove or somebody like that. Like, there's a limit. There's a saying I sometimes have at the company, which is you can only do what you can raise the capital for, right? If you can't fund it, you can't do it, no matter how interesting and awesome it is. There are way more ideas on how to solve problems than there is capital to invest in it. So you almost have to create like one of these tornado diagrams and be like, all right, what is the most sensitive and approachable and addressable problem, an impactful problem that I have? And I'll put some money behind that to try and help me be more successful with my outcome. And I'm going to work my way down. And if I am woefully underfunded, I'm not going to be able to knock off as many of those ideas. And if I've got an abundance of capital, I can go pretty far down that list. But it is so imperfect and imprecise, right? All you can do is collect the data. You just take a scientific method, collect the data, collect the information. In this case, the data and information is coming from people with lived experience primarily, but there's other data and information. You pull that together and you just try and make good decisions. And then you just execute, right? You shift from planning to operations and execution. And then you get your data and you analyze it and you see what you learn from it. Maybe you win, maybe you lose, but I don't, if we're coming together and we're thinking this is a problem that will solve it, no, that's math. Like my kid does that, right? This is just about probabilities. It's a problem and how can we give ourselves the best chance? And some of that is looking back and seeing what people did wrong last time and let's not make the same mistakes and that sort of behavior. And you can do that as a collaborative industry or community. You can accelerate the maturation of a field by having those conversations. I'm not going to tell anyone how to control and make the cells that we make, right? That's secret sauce. But there are a lot of conversations that we're happy to have to try and help move the field forward because we're all going to benefit.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think the tornado, I love that. Like, what is the thing that takes us the longest time in our clinical trials? And it's to get sites activated, and it's to get the contracts done for the endpoints and all that. And I think what like Praxis has done is we can shorten that by creating networks, creating networks ahead of schedule. And we can do that as a field, and we can kind of be better at. And we're going to be competing for some, but there's not a whole lot of overlap. There's a certain number of trials that are very different and very distinct. And I think that we can come together and work through that kind of, create networks, create people who can run certain trials and share that information. So you're not starting from scratch every time you start a clinical trial.
Yeah, I think we can learn also from other fields that have done exactly that. It's streamlining the clinical process, getting pools of people with lived experience who want to go into studies before a study is announced, rather than spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to attract people to a study. And it's kind of a weird process. It's not as orchestrated as many other disease states are. And we can mature as a group by collaborating as a group.
Got it. And I would be slightly remiss if I just didn't take my scientist hat off for a second and put my analyst hat back on here and a couple of company-specific questions. So for Onward, I wanted to get maybe just a little more about the commercial model, about evolving between the external device that's coming first to the internal devices, and do you get views that the internal devices are going to eat the external's cake, or how do you see it evolving in that sense?
Yeah, the externals, the de novo application.
Right.
So it's like you're building that mountain, and will there be benefits from it carried over? Sure, as far as like learnings about the process and all of that, certainly. But and I'm not obviously on the clinical team, but certainly there are so many learnings that make the whole process so much more efficient the second time around. And as far as that process is, yes, we hope to achieve commercialization by the end of the year, and then go for the CE mark next year for that. And then also towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, begin our pivotal trial for the implantable device.
Great.
So that's the path.
And are those studies smaller? I know we didn't have the full presentation today, but are they smaller? No, they're not like bridging studies. They are still sizable to be able to get the internal answers.
The ARC-IM pivotal,
Yes.
you mean the Empower BP?
Yep.
I am not sure
Yep.
where we are going to land on but it's going to be a full-scale multi-center pivotal trial.
Got it. And then for AbbVie, I was just curious, since you're looking at so many endpoints, when do you think we can see data, and, will it come out in multiple parts? Is it just going to be top line first, or what's your sort of publicly stated projections?
Great question. So since we just completed enrollment last year, it's 52 weeks treatment. Obviously, it takes some time to close the database and do the lock. Hopefully, maybe in a couple, this time next year, a couple months after, we're hopeful to be able to share that information. But it all depends on how the data look and how long it takes us to analyze it, because it might take some time for us to look at different endpoints, how they are connected. The biomarker data might come a little later. Sometimes the imaging data come a little later. So hopefully next year at some point.
So maybe we can pin you down to announce the top line
No,
data
I cannot
here
do that without my
at this
attorney here.
conference.
Oh,
No.
I don't think I can go so far as to say that, but I said
I know,
2025.
I know. The lawyers are listening. I know. And then from Kringle's standpoint, I just wanted to make sure I was clear. So, the path in what you've been doing in Japan is, very straightforward, and the results that you've seen. I just wanted to make sure what the outstanding questions are regarding the program in the United States.
Yes, so again, we are now focusing on the IND preparations and hoping be IND ready early next year. So I'm hoping that currently yen is very weak, so we need to raise another money to conduct it.
Do you have a key outstanding question that you're waiting to hear back from as part of your FDA discussions about any potential design changes, or like how ready to press play are you?
Yeah, so we had a very useful comments from FDA, and again, we are now past couple months we are discussing with KOLs regarding the study design, and hopefully we craft the best clinical protocol.
Excellent. And then I guess it applies both to a NervGen and Lineage, but from a NervGen standpoint, I just wanted to make sure, what is the potential timing of data at this point? Because obviously that will present the next catalyst to be able to get visibility on the going to a more, a full, like you said, proof of concept or a confirmatory phase 2.
Sure. So we, the one thing that I will admit is I'm not good at forecasting enrollment. It's been a challenge. It was a bit of a learning curve when we first started. It's a single center study, so that does put some challenges to us, but it's a small number. And you can see we just announced, we announced a couple weeks ago the first 12 patients in, so we're not too far away. We moved our guidance to Q3 of this year to complete enrollment in chronic. So then we will make an announcement the day that the last patient in the 20 for chronic is enrolled, and then we'll give clarity, because all of our shareholders are wondering this, they're asking the same question. Then I'll be able to give them an exact date, because you add 16 weeks until they're done with the study, then you add 4 to 6 weeks for data analysis and crunching, and then we'll announce the data. But we received Fast Track designation last October, so we are doing a ton of work right now in CMC and manufacturing. We just qualified a new drug substance manufacturer. So we're doing a lot of the things behind the scenes that don't get the glory that the clinical data does, to be prepared to get to the next step, which would be initiating, having a data readout in Q1 of next year, and then a phase 2 meeting potentially with the FDA, depending on the data, and then rolling right into a large multi-center study.
Got it. Thank Thank you. And then Brian, I guess from your standpoint, the re-emphasizing or reiterating the timing to get first patient in for OPC1, but also the readiness to do that with regard to having the device ready to go, training, cells ready to go across the board.
Yeah, I think we had a little bit of an advantage insofar as we have had an IND open for many years. We're putting through an amendment with a protocol change, and we are in the same stage of, you get some questions, you provide answers, and then you wait. So I was hoping that we would have the study open before this event. It would have been nice to be able to say that we were open and enrolling, or the first site was open or something like that. Didn't happen. There are a lot of cell and gene therapies that are being proposed to FDA, so I think the whole machinery has been moving a lot slower than we would all like. But I don't think it'll be too long. I don't think it's going to be all that particularly difficult. And the fact that it's an open label study and that it's a safety study and that people want to know, did the device work? And people are going to be very curious to see if there's any sort of, a tickle of a signal in a chronic patient. With the usual caveats in place, I assume we'll do everything we can to get as much information and in kind of real time. That was what we did with our vision disorder program. We were very open in sharing. We took you on the journey of our data. We showed time course as it unfolded, which is not always recommended in biotech because it's kind of dangerous to do that, but we don't mind taking that philosophy. So we'll be pretty open about our data as it's unfurling.
So I guess at this point, with the physicians in the audience that are doing it, the surgeons, the scientists, the researchers, and you guys are at the corporate and the clinical trial design tip of the spear, if you will. So since you're on stage right now, and we do have some time, I wanted to see if there were any questions from the audience, because obviously you've been very quiet today.
There are model systems, and there are, the NACTIN sites as well. I think that you're still not going to capture all of the SCIs, and not everybody can get to one of those sites. So I think if there's some way that we can actually broaden the expertise, but not actually, currently have problems with care, but broaden expertise. I think the people might be cared at a trauma center, but they don't have the clinical research infrastructure at that center. That is the challenge with acute. I think other people can speak better to chronic, but you're absolutely right with acute. The good thing, I guess, with SCI, if there's any good thing, is that you know when it's happened. It's not like a stroke where you can wake up in the morning and you don't know when you had the stroke and you have a time course. I think with SCI, generally in the States, unless you were in the middle of nowhere, States or Canada or Europe, you usually get to a trauma center within like 4 to 8 hours. The problem then is what we talked about is exclusion criteria, inclusion criteria, consent within that time. Consent is really, really tough. But I think we could use more expertise and broaden, say, the NACTIN centers and the model systems and share that expertise with others. It's really the clinical trial expertise. But it takes resources and time at hospitals and trauma centers, and I think that's really hard to find.
I think where we can make a difference is, we can't go drop level 1 trauma centers into small towns across the U.S., right? But one of the things that I was thinking about is, we have Plex input, and we have motivated and listening sponsors or companies. But who's not here, not well represented, maybe we'll work on this next year, other sites. So my mind started wandering to things like study coordinators, and do study coordinators get sensitivity training with respect to wheelchairs? Maybe the answer is yes, I have no idea. But that's where something's happening. So in terms of bang for your buck, if we're getting feedback from people who are saying, oh, this would make it easier, this would get you better data, we can't really do anything about that back where we sit. But if we can invest in and help those people at the sites, and I think I heard, maybe it was Dr. Guest, somebody said something about, yeah, you know, I'm not always well-resourced for these studies. So maybe that's something that we all collectively can invest in, because that's an enrichment that we're interested in, and it's a place where we can kind of make that link connection to the feedback and kind of turn it back around and go, okay, from feedback, now we have action.
I don't know if this is the right group to ask these questions. Maybe some of the basic scientists will want to chime in on this too, but for the first time in our history, we are starting to make some progress on improving outcome in spinal cord injury. But if you look across the widely disparate ways we're going about this, they're all achieving about the same amount. What does that mean? Is that all we're going to get? Are they going to be additive? Is that the best we can expect?
I think it's going to be additive. I certainly feel it's going to be additive. The biggest challenge, which was brought up earlier, is for a therapeutic, for a drug, you got to show the FDA that you work in monotherapy before you start to show you can work in combination. Unless you approach the combination therapy, but they're going to want to look at the individual parts individually before they look at the combination. So that could be a challenge that we could get together on and approach the FDA to see if, you know, if our drug, say we have a great electrophysiological endpoint, but smattering of functional endpoints across the board. I think that would give us enough, well, two things have to happen. We have to be able to convince the investment community to give us about $150 million to go prove that in a large multi-center study, which is going to be a bit of a challenge, but I think it's doable. It would be, I know that, you know, we're talking to folks that want to do paired stimulation and NVG-291 at the same time today. And it makes obvious sense that those two things together should work better than those two things apart. But they're going to want to know that how we work. And maybe after we get this data, depending on the strength of the data, we could take that plus the stimulation data and go to the FDA and say, okay, we're going to combine these two things together. But we don't know. We have to do the monotherapy component of it first.
Well, I want to thank you all for presenting your wares, very encouraging technologies, and please bring on the data. Thank you very much.